To the 10th meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. Colleagues, we provide this statement every meeting, and it's appropriate that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city's service, please contact accessibility@london.ca, 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a specific request to this meeting, please contact sppc@london.ca. Colleagues, before we get into the details of our meeting here, I'd just like to ask if Ms. Datersbeer, are you on the line, please?
Hello, Your Worship, I am here.
Okay, if I'm going to say nice things about you, I wanted to make sure you were here. Colleagues, you know, this is Ms. Datersbeer's last SPPC meeting. Last meeting, we are absolutely terribly going to miss her, so I put together a few formal comments. Ms. Datersbeer, if you take this emotionally, which I don't know that you would, but if you did, we won't even see it. But let me begin if I could. Ms. Datersbeer, Sandra came to the London City Hall 7 years ago from the Ontario Housing Ministry. And since that time, she's become an incredible champion for the work being done across the Corporation of the City of London to create, implement, and deliver services to those who are most vulnerable in our community. Most recently, Sandra has also been serving as the board for the London Housing Development Corporation and London Middlesex Community Housing. She currently lives in London. I say currently because she's going to be moving to Bruce County with her husband and son, who's at King's University College. Here's the good news about Sandra. She's a double graduate of Western University in London, so she's purple and proud times two. Sandra holds both a bachelor's degree in honors psychology and a master's in public administration. Sandra is an active explorer in her community and serves on Western University Senate and its alumni associations as well, on the foundation at Huron University College, which is Western's founding college. Sandra's been a board member of Vanier Children's Services since 2017 and currently serves as co-vice chair of Vanier's board of directors. In all the things that Sandra has touched in her time, she has made tremendous impact. For all that she has done for us over these last 7 years, in so many positive ways, it's been like you've been here forever, Sandra, because of the commitment and the imprint that you have had on housing and working with our most vulnerable. You will be terribly missed. You have got a great staff, and we've established some succession for now. And I will tell you that all of that is good, but you're the real deal. And from all of us at Council, may I just extend our heartfelt thank you and best wishes for your future in Bruce County. And don't forget your friends in London, Ontario, the 10th largest city. At some time, come visit us. And I know, colleagues, we can show our appreciation by the most appropriate. And I think if we just gave a round of applause to our friend, that would just be great. Now, Sandra, you're welcome to say a couple of comments, and we're going to put you on the spot. I'm not nearly as articulate as Councillor Squire was in the last meeting that we had earlier today, but I did my best. So, Sandra, if I might, I'd invite you to say a few words.
Thank you, Your Worship, and to the members of Council. I'm most appreciative of your kind thoughts and your very, very kind words today. It is very with mixed emotion that I leave here. This is a place I've called home for over 30 years. And as much as I am from Huron County, London is a place where I have come when I came to university and where my husband and I have raised our son. So while I leave here with, I guess, an adventure to go on in Bruce County, I leave here with really great thoughts about the work that we've done here, the team that works daily, and that includes members of council and staff across the corporation, and mostly for those who are most vulnerable in our community. And I'm thankful for that work. I'm appreciative of the staff who've done it, and I look forward to watching how London continues to grow in the future.
Thank you, and always remember London as fondly as we remember you. Colleagues, I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Hearing none. We have two items on the consent agenda, 2.1, 2.2. Does anyone wish any of those dealt with separately? Councillor Turner.
I might inquire about 2.2.
2.2, all right, so noted. I'm sorry, to have it dealt with separately or just discussed? All right, we'll have that dealt with separately. Councillor Squire.
2.1.
Would that be 2.1A and B, or can we leave B to the consent portion, which is to receive a communication?
2.1A is the receipt. I don't know why we wouldn't do the whole thing.
All right, fine. Then we'll deal with these separately. 2.1. We'll turn that over and look for comment. Firstly, if I can, I know that our treasurer, Ms. Barbone, has a brief presentation to make. Perhaps I could call on her to say a few comments, please.
Thank you, through the chair. I have just a couple of slides to just help you walk through the very significant report that we've put in front of you and to provide some context for you. So I see if this will work. I have some slides, if that will work. Can you see them? I'm just testing if that's there. I am preparing, just pulling it up. One moment. Okay. Can everybody see that? Awesome. So just to walk you through, what I thought I would do is to give you a little bit of the highlights on the projected financial impacts. So what I really want to just highlight in terms of the report that's before you and the preliminary estimates, they are in fact preliminary. They are subject to potential significant variability depending on how long this emergency continues to last. So they were prepared at a point in time based on the information we have, and it is something we will have to monitor regularly going forward. It is intended to provide an order of magnitude with respect to the budget. And what I would add is that in addition to this, we are looking very, very closely at our cash flow, which is obviously a significant point of our liquidity and how we get through paying the bills on a daily basis. This takes us to what the potential budget impact would be over the period of the year. So at this time, we have not incorporated two key things. We have not looked at the property tax write-offs because obviously, depending on how long this goes, there could be some uncertainty to that in the future, but that is something we are certainly monitoring. The other part that we have not taken into account as of yet either is the planning and development application fees or building permit revenue and development charges. We have assumed that they are delayed and not lost at this time, but certainly if this goes on for a much longer period of time, there could be some changes in those assumptions. So what we've provided in Appendix A can essentially be characterized into three main components. So if we were to look at that specifically, to go through, there's three main components: lost revenues, additional costs, and then cost savings or additional revenues that are in mitigating the lost revenue impact. So when we look at that specifically, if you were to look through the third column that shows the impact through August, the $32 million as a projection that we're looking at could be the potential deficit for this year. And what I would show you is the largest impact on the lost revenues of that $47 million is in fact the transit fare revenue as a result of the loss of revenue to rear boarding. So that is a huge significant impact that we have lost for revenue that's coming in, along with a number of other revenues, specifically with our water and wastewater. Reduced water consumption is driving that. Our investment income, we were planning to have quite a significant year. We had good projections, and then that has been reduced quite significantly. With the slots closed throughout the province, we have significant reduction anticipated in our OLG revenues that fund our base budget, as well as a number of reductions across the corporation: parking, our municipal accommodation tax, event revenue at RBC Place, and provincial offenses revenues that are quite reduced from what they would normally be. So that's really the one large bucket and the one that we are seeing the most significant impact. The second bucket is what we are calling the additional costs. So this is, to provide installation spaces, additional costs incurred to procure protective equipment to support our staff and workers throughout the corporation, additional materials, and then technology, which is a small portion to support the remote work that we've been doing. So then the last bucket is really, we have had some cost savings, which you will see do reduce the impact overall. Some of that has been as a result of choices to delay casual and temporary staff hiring based on the fact that our facilities are closed. We are realizing reduced fuel consumption as a result of fleet services, and the closure of facilities is resulting in savings in electricity and natural gas as well. And then there has been some provincial federal funding that has supported our vulnerable populations, which has been offsetting some of the additional costs. So that's just in a nutshell in terms of walking you through what's in Appendix A. So when we look at that, we are also, mindful of what things we can do to address those pressures. And I think what I would draw your attention to is that throughout our budget conversations, we were very mindful of our key financial principles, which I think are extremely important. You can find them on page 8 of the agenda package, or you can refer to that section in that report. But what it does is it looks at, some of the key tried and true principles that, especially depending on the duration and extent of the economic impact, these financial principles will help us remain, I think, sustainable and to help us weather the storm in the long term. So what I do note is that the Municipal Act does not allow us to have deficits. If there is a deficit, we have to fund it at the end of the year. And that's where, thank goodness, that London has had some robust contingency that has been put aside that certainly could be useful in this case. And whatever is not funded would need to be recovered over the next year. There has been some discussion about the province looking at this, but what I would say from a financial lens is that this rule was put in place for the Municipal Act to ensure that municipalities remain sustainable. So I think it's something that could, if municipalities were looking to incur significant deficits, could have a significant impact on the sustainability of the municipality in the future. So it's something we need to be very, very mindful of. So as we are moving forward, we are looking very, very carefully at our financial projections over the coming weeks. Budget monitoring right now is probably one of the most critical things that we are doing on a regular basis to ensure that we understand the impacts, and as new decisions are made and changes are identified, that we can model what that looks like and try to identify if we are able to mitigate to the extent possible what the potential financial pressures could be. So with that in mind, we have identified a number of key measures to be able to address the impact. So really they kind of fall into 4 main categories that we've been looking at. So the first one is spending restraint overall. So where there is discretionary spending that we have an ability to minimize, we are trying to do that to the extent possible. We are also asking all civic service areas, the agencies, boards, and commissions to do the same, so that we have reached out to a number of the boards to look at cost containment wherever possible to assist the corporation in trying to manage this year's deficit. The other opportunity that we have is the 2019 budget surplus. I can say that, and we will have a report that will be coming forward on May the 11th outlining our full 2019 budget surplus. But I will say that we are certainly fortunate to have had a little bit of extra surplus that came to us beyond the $4.5 million that was committed through the budget process. So we will be recommending that this is going to the operating budget contingency reserve fund so that it can be utilized as a funding source to help us offset the impacts that we are realizing this year. The other item that we are looking at is our assessment growth. So typically we would have done a report to allocate the assessment growth for 2020 at this time. We had prepared the report, and then obviously we had a COVID emergency and we've deferred it. So what we're looking at doing is to recommend that only urgent essential growth items are put forward and funded this year so that the balance on a one-time basis will be available to help support and mitigate the overall deficit that we would have. So what we would be suggesting is that whatever funding is not required to be allocated, and I believe there's only a few key areas that might actually meet the test to require an urgent growth allocation, is that the remainder would then be carried forward and we would allocate as we had initially planned in 2020, early in 2021. And I would note that certainly any assessment growth and what that could look like for 2021 is certainly not certain at this time. And it is possible based on, if there are changes with businesses and things that come forward, that you could actually have a negative assessment growth that would have an impact on the tax base. So it's something we will be watching very carefully. So the fourth item that we're also looking at currently is to look at all of our capital projects and our reserve fund contributions that were planned for 2020 to look at any opportunities that they can be deferred with minimal consequences to allow us a little bit of time to assist with additional revenue as well to assist in managing the deficit for this year, as well as looking at the reserve fund contributions if we can have a 1 year delay in contributing so that we can use that money as well to fund on a one-time basis. So those are the things that we're looking at and are continuing to work through and understand what the impacts are so that we can report back with a more fulsome report when we have a little bit more information. And hopefully in the next few months that we will have some more certainty as to the length of this pandemic. So just to end, I think there's also been a lot of conversations about the multi-year budget and what we need to do from a budgeting perspective. So what I would say is that built into our multi-year budget process, we have a very robust annual review process. So it is flexible to allow opportunities to adjust where necessary, and certainly COVID may be something that we need to adjust as a result. So the annual budget update is certainly the opportunity. So originally, the preliminary timeline was going to be late October, early November with a December approval. We can certainly look at whether that's feasible or whether that needs to be adjusted depending on the duration. It certainly could be something that we could move forward into January if it was required, if there was more certainty that we needed on a number of fronts. So we're certainly looking at that now, and we'll have further information coming forward as to what that process would look like in terms of trying to look at timelines based on how things unfold. So that was all that I had for my slides. And I'm happy if there's any other questions regarding the report to answer.
Before we take questions from colleagues, our city manager has a few comments. Ms. Livingston.
Thank you, Your Worship. So what I would add in addition to Ms. Barbone's presentation is just to identify that the remainder of the report serves to highlight the federal and provincial initiatives that are already underway to address COVID from a relief perspective. In addition to that, we were asked to bring forward a comprehensive list of other possible immediate relief measures, which you will see in the report. I would just draw to your attention that item number 3 in that list, the municipal funded COVID emergency benefit. I'm sure people can appreciate that this report was written 2 weeks ago. Both federal and provincial governments have since then initiated a number of additional relief measures, and because of that, we would not be suggesting that this particular idea be considered at this time. There have been a number of other measures put in place by other levels of government that serve to address what we were trying to consider with this idea. So the rest of the list stands as presented in the report, but we just wanted to draw your attention to that particular one. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I have Councillor Squire, then Councillor Turner on the list so far. Councillor Squire.
Yes, my first question, this really pertains to governance, I suppose, and moving forward, and appreciating that there's administrative decisions that are made by administration and then political decisions that are made by us. And it's just not clear to me in the report what decisions we're going to be asked to make. For instance, we're given a list of potential expenditures to provide COVID relief, but we're asked right now just to receive that list. So I guess I don't understand if moving forward, are they going to come back to us for approval? Is the administration purporting to say, well, we may just do these and come and tell you about them after we've done them? Similarly, with capital projects, you're going to be analyzing capital projects, but I, for instance, know already that the downtown parking project that went out for requests for proposals, as I understand, has the proponents or people who have already come forward on that have already been told, well, we're putting that off. That's not going to go ahead. So I guess my concern is that we've given a report that's primarily informational. What I'm curious about is, are we going to be asked as a council to approve these measures? Because it certainly appears to me that certainly with the downtown parking facility, and I don't agree with this, that staff has purported to postpone that. And I think that's something that should have come to council for decision making if that was a capital project that was to be postponed. So I'd like to know where we're going with approval by council of some of these things moving forward.
Ms. Barbone?
Your worship, it's Ms. Livingston. I wonder if I could first speak.
Go ahead, please.
So to address the first question on the list of measures and what we were intending with the report, I'll speak to that and then I'll refer it to Ms. Barbone with respect to the capital projects. What we were asked to do was provide a comprehensive list of other possible relief measures. And we have done that in two ways, one with respect to Londoners and the other is with respect to businesses. We have not and are not recommending any of necessarily any of these relief measures. We were asked to provide a list of them. However, given the financial situation that the city is facing, we are not at this time recommending them. That is why they are here as information. Certainly it is council's prerogative if you wish to move forward with any of the identified relief measures, either from a Londoner perspective or a business perspective. That is council's prerogative, but at this time, civic administration is not recommending any specific measure listed there.
Ms. Barbone, were you going to add to that?
Yes, thank you. So with respect to capital projects, specifically, I'll start with that. We are reviewing all the capital projects. Because the capital projects are specifically approved within the multi-year budget, that review will come forward to council and with a number of recommendations that council can choose to specifically identify and proceed or not proceed, knowing what the full impacts will be. So that work is being undertaken through civic administration at this time, and we would bring the results of our review forward through to council when that report is ready. With respect to the procurement process, what I would suggest is that the procurement process, typically until there is something that is formally to be approved by council, there is nothing to bring forward for council to approve. The procurement process is run by civic administration, and what I would note is clearly within the procurement policy, there is to be no political interference in the actual work of the procurement policy until something is brought forward to council. So I think certainly from our perspective, there is no capital project specifically set aside for that particular procurement. It was directed for staff to undertake a procurement, and noting that it was to find a partner, it was not a procurement per se that was approved and had financial implications that were clearly identified. So based on whatever proposals are brought forward, the process was initiated just to go through the pre-qualification, and then there would be an invited RFP to proceed based on the successful proponents. So when that goes forward at that time, it would be based on whatever was put forward through the RFP that was received. Noting that when that proposal comes forward, there will be a number of things that will be identified, that one of which will be what the municipal requirement as a partner would even be. And noting that in order to respond to that proposal, there were a number of financial elements that could put a proponent at significant risk to put forward a letter of credit at this time, noting that we're trying to grant relief to a number of people. The need of whether that project could potentially change in the future could be quite significant based on the extent of the pandemic. So to put something forward and ask for something that could further add to our capital plan at this time without having the broader oversight of what that means in our broader capital plan, I think is premature at this time.
Councillor Squire?
Yeah, so I understand your answer. Whether I agree with it or not is another thing, and whether there's other steps, I'll leave that for today. I just wanted to move on to LTC because it's important to me. LTC is meeting tomorrow. The way I'm reading this report, and you can help me, you seem to be taking it, not you, I mean, there seems to be responsibility being taken on by the city to cover the shortfall of LTC. In other words, you're recognizing the shortfall in revenue from backdoor loading as an issue that you're including in the challenges to the city, which I suppose is really good news for LTC. If LTC was meeting as a separate board and saying, you know what, we have this revenue shortfall, we've got to find something within our own budget and our own operations to alleviate this and make up for it, whether that's through the assessment growth money that we're getting, that we can't have new projects and we have to allocate it to this, or even some of the new routing and new plans that we had. I just think it's a little bit dangerous, not if I can use that word, for the city to put itself in the position of saying, you know what, that shortfall that LTC has going right now, we've got to recognize that a part of the city's responsibility. Because to be fair to you, the decision making of the LTC is done by the LTC. So the LTC through CUDA, Canadian Urban Transit Association, is seeking its own funding from federal sources for the shortfall we're suffering. So I'm sort of torn between two things here. As an LTC chair, I'm sitting here going, this is great. The city's sort of including our shortfall in theirs, and they're gonna take care of it. But I think as a counselor, I'm saying, I really think you should look at LTC and say to LTC, hey folks, you've got a budget. We gave it to you. You've made some decisions. Don't you think you should find some of that money for that monthly shortfall out of your current budget? So I'd be interested, so that I have really good information for my meeting tomorrow at LTC. What is the position of the city? Because I'm a little confused.
Ms. Bourbon?
Thank you. So there's two things specifically related to that. So we have been in contact with all the boards and commissions and indicated that we expect every board and commission to mitigate their potential deficit to the extent possible. We also realize that as a city as a whole, because we do have financial statements that are consolidated and that the city does provide a number of taxpayer dollars to our boards and commissions, that should the boards and commissions not be successful in mitigating the impact, or whether the city as a whole, including its boards and commissions, are unsuccessful in receiving support from other levels of government, then there could be an overall impact that the City of London would have to take over the overall deficit. So from a holistic approach, the impact on the City of London as a whole is $33 million. But that is at this point in time before other decisions are undertaken to mitigate that. So to the extent possible, as LTC and any other organization is able to mitigate that deficit to the extent possible, we would encourage you to do so, and the overall impact on the city will therefore decrease. Now, if the city is I think successful in receiving some support, I think even if there is support, there is a number of recovery activities and other things that would need to occur. So whatever we can mitigate will allow us to have a little bit more available to mitigate the cost of potential recovery strategies that the city might want to do. So we've been working closely with the boards and commissions, and that's where the assessment growth, we've had numerous discussions with a number of them to look at what that impact, and that's certainly one tool that they can utilize. But if the city and the boards and commissions are unsuccessful in receiving those dollars, the boards and commissions may be unable to completely extinguish that loss in revenue, in which case I suspect that they will be going back to the City of London to request support. So it's important to look at the holistic impact on the taxpayer that could occur as a result of the actions that we need to mitigate. Hope that answers your question.
Councillor Squire?
Yeah, that was really helpful. And I guess you used the words encourage boards and commissions to mitigate their losses. I would be stronger. I would say I would expect the LTC and any other board and commission who is suffering a loss, expect them, and I would certainly expect that as from being the chair of the LTC. I expect that we should have to go back and do everything we can to mitigate the loss we're suffering on a monthly basis. And I certainly wouldn't go back there and say, you know what, the city's going to pick up the bill on this no matter what, so don't worry about it. I just don't think that's a great approach for a board and commission. If I was a city councillor not on LTC, I would want the LTC to say that to me, so I'm going to say it. So thank you very much. I may have more questions, but I really appreciate that very much.
Thank you. I have Councillor Turner, then Deputy Mayor Helmer. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Squire addressed one of the concerns, and just in general, the framing of the projected financial impacts is kind of a net and not necessarily the levy impacts on the city. There's about $10.5 million in there that's not levied necessarily. The LTC, the RBC place, the MAT, and the market. I would imagine that those all sit someplace else rather than something that needs to be generated through tax levy. And should be strategies that are identified elsewhere. So I appreciate the answer from that. The one that kind of puzzles me a little bit is the part where it talks about does not incorporate due to uncertainty at this time, planning and development application fees. Anticipated that these are delayed revenues as opposed to loss. But if they're not posted in 2020, then they would be considered lost, would they not? And I'd imagine a construction window on a lot of these projects will have been missed, or where there might be serial projects that they're just pushed back. So we don't post the revenue associated with those fees in the 2020 fiscal year. So I think at this point we would have to consider those lost to some degree. And the other side is the development charges component to it. I recognize if works aren't being done, we're not incurring draws on the DCs, but again, it wouldn't they wouldn't be posted in this fiscal year because we've already lost 2-3 months of construction at this point. Would that be correct?
Ms. Barbone?
Thank you, through the chair. So it's difficult to say. Certainly, if this is done by the end of May, then I think the likelihood of not having lost the revenues, but they've been delayed, is certainly more likely than if this goes to, say, the end of the summer. So it does entirely depend on the length of the emergency declaration and the ability of the businesses to be able to bring in applications and keep that moving forward. Also, to the extent of which we can process applications, because the timing of when the building permits are issued is what dictates when the revenue is actually recorded. So if building permits are issued and we advance work so that they're done by the end of the year, if it is a short-lived emergency, then we would have a significantly less impact than if it were to go till the end of August, shall we say. So right at this time, it's very difficult to say, but that is, as this goes on longer, very, very likely we could have lost to a certain extent some of that revenue. So it's as I said, this is very preliminary, and this continues to evolve on a daily basis. So we are looking at that and trying to understand. Once we get back to work, then we'll have a clearer idea to what extent some of that will be lost. But I think it's very challenging to say what proportion at this point will be lost, depending on the ability for us to move forward with recovery efforts. Where, and then that's where some of that report, we have not gone that route yet. It's still early days to identify what that will look like. And extent of what the development charges, it all depends on the programs and things that are happening at that time. So there's a lot of things that work together in congruence with one another to be able to give you a more accurate answer on that. So I suspect we will have much more information in the next couple of weeks as to what potential degree those revenues could be lost, if any.
Councillor Turner?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess I would say that that I think there is a lot of uncertainty in those, and I think there's a lot that can be accounted, or that can't be accounted for yet. My only concern is just kind of this broad statement to think that that they're just delayed and not lost. I think there's a good component that just won't be posted in 2020 and would be posted in the subsequent year, so it would be considered lost revenue. Just as a quick note, I recognize in the report it identifies potential impacts to the Middlesex London Health Unit budget. This isn't a decision document, so there's no conflict of interest at this point, but if there was a funding question that was associated with the MLHU, I would identify that conflict as I am an employee of that board. The last question, or I guess a couple of questions then. I mean, given all of this, given some of this exists within our operating budget, and some of it is within reserves, and some of it's within boards and commissions. If we were to pull out and just say what the direct operating budget of the City of London is, there's about a $10.5 million impact up to June. Given the measures that you've identified, would we be able to accommodate that within the current levy? Or is there a risk of having to seek subsequent funding through an additional levy mid-year?
Ms. Barbone?
So through the chair, I would suggest at this point we are doing we're making every effort possible to reduce the impact and mitigate it through decisions that we can bring forward to council, that we can do within our current operating budget. I would suggest that we certainly have contingencies in place for a reason, and we would try to utilize that to the extent that we can to mitigate this as well. So I think there's a number of things we're looking at to try to mitigate that, but certainly it is not our intent to look at additional levies for 2020 in any way.
Councillor Turner? Thanks very much. I have Deputy Mayor Helmer and then Councillor Morgan. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks for the report, especially to the treasurer and her team for pulling it together. It's not a small thing to try and figure out all the impacts are, and I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask about the uncertainty around tax arrears and accounting for that within the financial impact. I know when we had the 2007-2008 financial crisis, we saw elevated tax arrears for quite a while, not just the 1 year following, but for several years after that, something on the order of like 1.5 percentage points higher than what it was before the financial crisis. We're now sort of back down to those sort of sub 5% in arrears kind of figures. So I wonder if you could just talk about what the range of possible outcomes might be. I know it's hard to tell at this point, but so we can get a sense of what the order of magnitude might be. Even a 1 percentage point problem is a $6 million problem. So I wonder if you could just speak to that and the uncertainty and difficulty in trying to forecast that.
Ms. Barbone.
So thank you. Through the chair, there's a number of components that flow into that from that question. So one of them is certainly a cash flow implication that would, as people are delayed in making payments, certainly the cash flow that the city relies on primarily from property tax revenue is delayed. So I think certainly with the robust nature of our reserves and reserve funds, we are very fortunate that we have been able to weather the ups and downs with it and allowed council to be able to offer the tax deferrals without too much issue on the city's side for meeting our obligations from a cash flow. So that's the first part that I think certainly we could see less cash as a result, which might mean we may have a little less investment, and there's certainly a little bit of loss of interest and penalties and interest as a result of additional costs there and interest revenue from the cash that we would have earned otherwise in our bank. But I think we're in a good position to be able to weather that. So that's the first component. The second component is where we have unpaid taxes that are outstanding for a number of years. We certainly have a number of measures that we undertake to recover the taxation. Certainly, tax sales is one of those things that could potentially result from that. You could have an increase in that. And the other option is where you have other write-offs and things from our entire assessment base that could potentially erode in the future. So where I had referred earlier to possibly having a negative assessment growth, what you could have is, as you have write-offs and your entire assessment base from businesses that no longer recover, the assessment base across the entire city starts to erode as we put forward write-offs. And what that does is it has the impact that it could potentially require more tax revenue from the other taxpayers to make up the difference. So it's very challenging to try to come up with numbers and what that could potentially look like, but those are some scenarios that we could start to look at. We haven't yet, just because the extent of that to try to even estimate at this point, it's still very early to try to determine what that is. Certainly with MPAC as well, deferring their assessments till beyond 2021 is we don't have a timing for that also. So that's where when we get the assessment rolled back, we would have a better indication of what those impacts are, but it's still very early days in terms of what that would look like. So there are some number of modeling things that we can start to look at. We haven't turned our attention to that yet because that will be a much longer term issue to deal with. But the first one would be the cash flow that I believe we're in a good place to weather. So it'll give us some time to look at the other things that are there and to look at. And some of that might be an impact as well on how you deal with future budgets and potentially looking at reducing the tax rate overall. And if there are other opportunities for government assistance that might allow us to do other things that might support the taxpayers in different ways, might help mitigate that. So it would fit very much within the recovery and other options in terms of what the city might choose to do going forward to possibly mitigate that impact.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure when in the conversation we're going to get to the immediate relief measures, but I'd like to just move that we go ahead with all of them except for 3 and 6. I think the total cost of that is something like $416,000. I think all these things are pretty sensible ideas. A lot of them are very small financial impact. The really big one is the Housing Stability Bank. And I think that is a very small drop in the bucket compared to the kind of problem that people are going to have in terms of rent and making their rent payments for some last month. So I think we're going to have to increase the capitalization of the Housing Stability Bank for sure. This would allow them to double it. So I think it's a pretty good use of funds, especially the things that are very small dollar impacts. I think they all need to at least be authorized now so we can start moving ahead on them relatively quickly. I think the need in the community is very, very substantial. And there are certain things we can do here at the city level. And I think we need to move on those things quickly. I don't think this is the end of the line in terms of these initiatives. So that would be 1 through 11, but not including 3 or 6. 6 is the tree bylaw permit fees. I'm not sure that that's necessary, but the rest of them I think are very good ideas.
If you're moving that, Deputy Mayor, do you have a seconder?
I have no idea.
Nor do I. Is there a seconder for the motion? It looks like Councillor Hillier is seconding that. So it's the recommendation with the exception of 3 and 6. I'll carry on with the speakers list. I have, I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor, did you wish to continue speaking to this at this point?
No, I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much. I have Councillor Morgan followed by Councillor Lewis. Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to stick to asking a few questions, and then I'll weigh in the debate a little later on the recovery measures. And then I also will speak again about, given that advocacy is a component of this report, I'll get myself back on the speakers list. I'm going to provide an update on some of the FCM advocacy related to COVID-19 that is related to our financial impacts. But first, I wanted to ask a couple of questions in the report of our staff. My first question is actually on the section on the measures that we're going to be taking to try to mitigate the impacts. The first is spending restraint, and there's a section talking about the spending restraint actions that the city manager has already authorized. and that we've encouraged boards and commissions to basically do the same. I wonder if our staff can articulate the extent to which that direction has been given. What are we not doing, and what are we doing, so that we have a sense as a council on, what initiatives are proceeding with and what ones we aren't. I don't need an itemized list, but just the general scope of that spending restraint directive.
Ms. Barbon.
Your worship, it's me, Lynn. Could I go?
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Livingston, please. I know you're not interchangeable, but you're both very necessary. So Ms. Livingston, please. Ms. Livingston, you just need to unmute.
Through the chair.
Go ahead.
So in terms of the direction that's been provided to ABCs, the treasurer has written to every ABC indicating the situation we're in and asking for measures to be undertaken with respect to spending restraint. Ms. Barbone and I have also met with some of our ABCs to have a very, at their request and ours, to have a very specific conversation about what further measures they may wish to consider. So we've talked about the number of steps that we're taking within the civic administration with respect to spending restraint that are articulated in the report, and we've tried to have a very direct conversation with our ABCs about that as well. I don't know if Ms. Barbone wishes to add to some of the specific measures we're undertaking within civic administration.
Ms. Barbone, do you wish to?
Through the chair, the only thing I would add is that as we're reviewing all of our budget monitoring, looking at all the lines, we are trying to, anything that's discretionary that doesn't have to be spent is certainly not being spent at this time. And any surplus would then be redirected to support the operations that are essential that need to continue to be delivered. And I think certainly we've offered to assist and work with any of the boards and commissions in whatever way is possible to, brainstorm and look at their budgets if there's anything else. And I think certainly whatever decisions we can make that would mitigate and preserve our cash is what we are trying to do at this time. And I think that's really, in terms of the next report that we would bring forward, would be a little bit more of a fulsome review of our budget and what the impacts are specifically through the budget monitoring that we're doing, as decisions have been made to date, and certainly delaying the staffing for buildings that are not needed. We're turning lights down in buildings that are not being used. So anything that we can do to mitigate the costs in whatever way is what we're currently trying to action through all of the service areas that we control.
Councillor Morgan?
Yes, so great. I'm going to ask a question about reporting in a minute, but I want to ask a question about assessment growth allocations first. So you'd mentioned that we could potentially use a portion of assessment growth on a one-time basis to mitigate this. But my expectation would be there would be probably components of the assessment growth asks that would be related to areas facing cost pressures right now. Emergency services would be the one that comes to mind. At what point will you have a sense of how much of that is available to us? And at what point during the year do you anticipate the assessment growth report to come forward for our information?
Ms. Barbone?
So through the chair, we were actually targeting the next SPPC meeting to bring that forward. I believe there is not a report or not a meeting in the month of May, so that we are looking at the early June meeting to bring that forward. And what that will allow us time is to finalize discussions with the boards and commissions so that they can identify, based on what was submitted, what is essential. So there's two ways that whatever we don't allocate to growth that actually needs to be utilized, obviously whatever is growth, I would allocate through assessment growth specifically for the use of supporting that growth through the business case. but whatever is remaining could then be partitioned out to support the various areas. And I might suggest that we would hold that back from the corporation's perspective to manage that on a global basis to see what the net impact from a city perspective would be, to ensure that we have sufficient funds to mitigate the impact as a whole.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. That's helpful, and that leads into my last question for now, and that's related to reporting on this. In the report, it talks about the budget surplus report coming forward on May 11th. You mentioned the assessment growth report coming forward in June. You also, through the presentation, talked about as time goes on, we will have a sense of a few things. One, the preliminary estimates will likely become more solidified as time goes on. We may get a sense of some sort of timing on the province's reopening procedures. Now, I don't know when that will happen. I think the Premier was very clear. They're outlining their processes, but they're certainly not executing that until certain conditions are met. And then, of course, there's asks of higher levels of government, both directly by the municipality and, as Councillor Squire said, through boards and commissions who are looking to mitigate some of their losses. So we'll have a lot more information at some point. What, beyond the May surplus report and the assessment growth report in June, what does the reporting back schedule look like on these particular items? This is a great report now, but what do you anticipate the pacing to be for us to get regular information on the status of the corporation, given things and how they evolve?
Ms. Barbone.
Thank you, through the chair. So the month of May, we're trying to close off the reports that have been slightly delayed to close off the 2019 year. So that will deal with the capital and the operating. So we're looking we're just finalizing those now so that they're prepared for the next corporate services meeting to review. So that'll give us the information that we're carrying over from 2019 with certainty. And then what we believe probably is the next best timing is to come forward again in June with a more fulsome update based on the information that we know at that point. So that gives us another couple of weeks to see what new information we have to update our numbers with the impacts that we know. And if there's anything new that we can capture, we can update those figures. We do know there are some requests from some boards and commissions that will potentially need to come forward to council. So I think June is probably the next best timing. I think May would be a little bit too soon, and that we would come forward with a more fulsome update based on the information we have at that point as the next iteration.
Councillor Morgan.
Your Worship, those are all the questions I have for now. I'll stick my hand up after I've heard from others with some commentary.
Thanks very much. I have Councillor Lewis, Councillor Squire, Councillor Hopkins. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to start with a couple questions as well before I say anything about the items for authorization. First is with regard to the staff recommendation F in this, which is authorizing negative balances to reserves. And where I struggle with the language in this one is negative balances. I mean, to me, reserve funds are essentially a savings account that we're going to draw from. So through you to our staff, how exactly are we authorizing negative balances and reserves? Is that not, in fact, at the point where we're borrowing on future rather than have the money that's in those reserve funds right now? I'm wondering if we can get just a little clarification on that to start.
Ms. Barbone.
Thank you, through the chair. So when we're referring to the negative balances, we're looking at negative from a cash flow perspective for a very small temporary period. You're absolutely correct. Reserve funds are like a specific bank account that has been put away. But based on the timing and what those reserves, they're not actually specific little bank accounts, although we treat them as such. So there are some cases based on when the timing of the revenue that goes in versus some of the timing of the revenue that we may be borrowing that might cause a balance to be negative for a very, very quick period of time till the cash flow is replenished. So it is not something that we typically try to allow, but just given the instances that with the deferral dates on the taxation and some of the way the reserve fund timing, and some of this would particularly depend on when capital projects, if some of them were to proceed, what the timing is. So this is just allowing us that authority that should it go dip below a positive balance for a very, very quick period of time till that fund is replenished again, that we have the authority to not charge interest as we would typically have done so. But this is not a practice that we would typically utilize. It would be very, very short-lived if it were to occur.
Councillor Lewis.
Okay, so just to follow up on that, and I just want to, again, this is for my own clarity and maybe for others as well, but in terms of authorizing a negative reserve fund balance, I appreciate what the treasurer is saying. Would I be correct in assuming that the first step that we would take is looking at not going ahead with authorized allocations that from reserve funds that might not be applicable at this time? And I know that during the budget process, for example, there were some items that were originally earmarked to come from the levy that were then moved to alternate sources of funding. In a couple of cases, those were reserve funds, but a couple of those projects might not necessarily need to move forward right now. So I just want to check in and make sure that that would in fact be the step that we would take first before we would get into negative balances.
Ms. Barbone.
Thank you, through the chair. So that is exactly what the reserve fund review that we're doing is currently looking at, is specifically to take a look at exactly what allocations, what reserve funds require those allocations to go in based on what was there and what's not, and looking at that in context of what the capital projects are. So as we continue that work, and we will have information to bring forward, some of it, I'm trying to think of a really good example specifically that I could utilize to demonstrate that. And you know, it might be specifically if we were to borrow from the reserve and that we delayed the allocation that was going to go in that would have gone forward. So they'd be, I'm sorry, I can't come up with a really quick one off the top of my head, but it really would happen quite infrequently. I think the bigger issue is not necessarily the fact that I don't anticipate, if the negative reserve fund balance were to occur, that it would be longer than we're talking a matter of days. The bigger part that we're looking to approve is not to charge interest when we do borrow from those reserve funds, just to deal with short-term cash needs, as we would normally allocate from our tax supported into those reserve funds to compensate for the loss of that balance. So that's primarily what our objective was, but the negative is certainly something we would avoid. And as we review what the capital plans are and what the reserve fund allocations are, we are certainly taking that into account. And if there are adjustments, we would bring those forward through the capital plan review and what potential actions we could take.
Councillor Lewis.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that through you, Chair, Ms. Barbone. That really helps me wrap my head around the negative reserves piece, and I'm much more comfortable with it now. I do want to, I'm going to offer some preliminary thoughts on Deputy Mayor Helmer's move on these items for authorization, because I appreciate where he's coming from, and I certainly am glad that 3 and 6 are not in there. I was concerned that 3 was even in the report because I felt that we were stepping into the territory of provincial and federal governments, backfilling their responsibilities for them. And 6 to me is one that we shouldn't be waiving. I mean, tree protection remains important even in this time. I am concerned though that we're jumping ahead on the authorization of some of these when some of them are going to be tied to items in Appendix E as well around the recovery. And I just want to share a couple of thoughts here on this. So items 1, 2, and 8 are all sort of tied into food security, and I don't think anybody would argue that that's not important right now. But if we get into Appendix E, there's also a component in there that I know Ms. Smith has been working on through Neighborhood Children and Fire Services around perhaps looking at some shifting of resources away to better support community gardening and home gardening efforts for food security in the midterm. So I see those two as kind of tied together, but we're only dealing with the short-term one now. And to me, particularly on that one, there's a timing issue because the growing season is frankly upon us. And if we're worried about food in people's baskets today, we should be also taking the steps to help them put some food on their table themselves 2 months, 3 months from now, by pursuing more active urban agricultural opportunities. The other one is when we look at item 7 in these items, closing the digital divide. I got a couple of concerns around this because it also relates to item 3 in Appendix E, which is the digital divide and repurposing old equipment. So we may have folks in LMCH properties right now who may not in fact have the equipment available to access home internet, even if we connect them. And then how we balance out the fact that we have 582 households already paying this cost out of pocket. Others maybe have chosen not to for whatever reason. Others may not be able to fit it in their budget. I'm concerned about how that one would roll out in terms of now we're going to give some tenants something out of the city budget that we were asking other tenants to pay out of their own budget. So there's a bit of an equity question there for me, but it's also the accessibility piece in terms of if you don't have the equipment, then there may not be necessarily the value in uptake and installing this home internet access. I do appreciate that this is for 3 months, that it's got a bit of a sunset clause built into the recommendation right now, but I'm also concerned that we see this as I would want to emphasize to support this, that we see this as a temporary measure, because we have seen, of course, things like this become permanent. And if, in fact, LMHC wants to provide this to their tenants on an ongoing basis, that should be through a budget ask with LMCH moving forward into future fiscal years. So I think that there's some really good ideas in here, but I'm not sure how the implementation of some of these is going to happen. And without the staff recommending these at this time, I'm a little hesitant to move forward on all of them, although I think there's some really great ideas here, and I think there's some that can make a difference right away. So I want to hear what colleagues have to say on this. I just wanted to share those concerns because I think there's some pieces in Appendix E that tie into these things, and if we're only looking at half the solution instead of the whole solution, I think we're doing a little bit of a disservice to folks, and I'd rather staff tie the two together and come back with some recommendations for us.
Thank you. So I have Councillor Squire, Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Van Holst. Councillor Squire.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and through you. One of the questions I was going to ask was about when we were going to hear again from staff about these issues. And Councillor Morgan covered that, and my understanding now is it will be at the end of June. But I just want to say this. When I read this report and looked at it, I was left with the impression that because we were just being asked to receive and file, that some of this decision making, for instance, on some of these interim measures, some cancel or deferral of capital matters, were not things that were going to come. I had no idea they were going to come back to us for consideration. And so I guess what I would like to see at the end of June is when we get a report from staff is what are you asking us to decide on and what aren't you asking us to decide on? Because that's what I always look for in a report. I always look to say, what is the issue that you really want us to decide? And I was not aware until we came here today that I was being asked to decide on these projects. I thought we were just being given these projects and they were going to be considered. Similarly with capital projects, it certainly didn't indicate to me that staff was going to be looking at these and coming back. So if I have a suggestion and to keep my blood pressure down a little bit, I really like it when a report comes to me and it clearly says, Council, here's what we want you to decide, and here's what we want you to look at. It's not a criticism. It's just I didn't see the clarity in this report for me to make decisions that I would have wanted to see, and so I'll just say that. The second part is with regard to the approval of these proposals. I didn't come in prepared today to weigh these and decide which I would have want to do or not. I think we're well served possibly by waiting to the end of June and getting more fulsome information before we start to prioritize what we want to do and what we don't want to do, because circumstances are changing so quickly and matters that may not be a priority today may be a priority next week. And we've already seen that with one matter sort of dropping off this list. Similarly, with the food security issue, we now know that the province is allowing community gardens is the allowing of community gardens now going to have some impact on these food security issues? So I'm always more in favor of making a complete decision when we have complete information. So I would look forward to doing that. I think more so in June, without saying that I'm against any of these projects. So those are my comments. Hopefully my final comments.
Well, it's early yet, but if I might say, colleagues, just so you know, the intent with this prior to the amendment that has been moved was that they be received, but now they have been added as a result of an amendment with the exception of 3 and 6. So I want just to be clear what it is that we're going to be dealing with. I have Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Van Holst. Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that clarification, because as I understand it, we do have the recommendation as it is in the report as the motion on the floor, and the discussion is around Deputy Mayor's comment about removing number 3 and 6 out of the immediate relief measures that are being proposed by staff. And just sort of, that's how I see it. And I appreciate the 3 and 6 being removed. Number 3, obviously, as there are funding opportunities already available out there. And number 6, I was surprised to read that the tree permit applications, the fees would be waived for the rest of the year. Wasn't sure, we're only talking about a small amount, so I appreciate Deputy Mayor's comments about removing that. I was surprised. It is a program I think that needs to continue. So through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, maybe the question would be, if we remove number 3, keep the fees in, is there a difficulty in having the applications processed? Would things have to change, or could we continue the process that we have in place?
Ms. Barbon?
Your Worship, it's Kelly Sharon, I believe.
Hey, Kelly.
How are you?
Go ahead.
The intent with the tree permit application fee was to keep the permit application in place, but to actually just waive the fee paid by a residential applicant or a property owner for the processing of that permit. The process itself would not change. If the fees are to be collected, that's also fine. It was just an attempt to provide some relief in an area that we have some discretion.
Councillor Hopkins? Thanks very much. Councillor Van Holst's thumb is down, so I will now turn to Councillor Lehman, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I have no problem with moving forward on these items, and I'm glad 3 was pulled. I'd just like to speak to 7. You know, on the surface, sure, why not? It's not a lot of money. However, I'm concerned that it's a slippery slope as we take over areas of responsibility that I don't perceive as the cities. You know, students are mentioned here, and I would suggest, you know, where's the school board on this stuff, and through that, the province. If the province is looking for online education, and I certainly think that's going to be a direction after we come out of this that the province will pursue, then I think this is an issue that is a provincial responsibility through the school boards to ensure that you know, students that are at LMCH have access to the internet. I don't know. I'm just it's for 3 months, but again, I'm just concerned about you know, the slippery slope, and I don't want to get into that and other areas of funding which are not the city's responsibility. So I would feel more comfortable, to be honest with you, the more I think about it. If we could exclude 7, I'd support the rest of it.
I'm not sure if I'm hearing an amendment to the amendment which is allowed, but unless the mover and seconder of the amendment are prepared to pull number 7 as well, can I turn to the Deputy Mayor who made that move, that motion? Deputy Mayor, what I believe what Councillor Lehman is suggesting is that number 7 be dealt with separately as well. And I'm not sure what your pleasure is. I believe he was looking for a friendly amendment, but if not, we can deal with all except 3 and 6 in addition to the report.
It's his pleasure to have it voted on separately. Anyone can request that, and you're the chair, so I'm sure that that's probably the easiest way of handling it. I don't want to amend it because it's of all those things. I think that one is the second most important. I'm happy to speak to that when I wrap up and see if I can convince Councillor Lehman.
Just bear with me, colleagues.
I have a question, Your Worship, when you have a sec.
Councillor Morgan, you go ahead. We're just finishing a couple of thoughts here, but I'm sure you'll be wise while I seek wisdom.
Well, it's just my understanding of what we were voting on, since there was no motion on the floor, is everything in the report plus Deputy Mayor Helmer's addition of including some things. So I don't believe his motion was an amendment to the original. I think everything's all together right now. And I just wonder if you can have the clerks clarify what motion is actually on the floor, so we don't think we're voting on an amendment and then actually move the whole thing.
Here's the joyful event that we are at committee, so we have some flexibility around this, and as a result, what we have is the recommendation of staff, and in addition to that, what we have a motion duly moved and seconded is to accept the recommendations with the exception of items 3 and 6 to be considered. Councillor Cassidy, I think I've got you on the list. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wonder if through you, I could ask staff to explain in detail number 7. So it talks about expanding the Rogers Connected for Success program, currently providing internet access to LMCH tenants at $9.99 a month, and 582 households are currently accessing this. So who is the city paying any portion of the 582 households that are currently accessing it? What does it actually mean? If you could just provide, and I apologize if it's laid out in the report, I would just like to hear it verbally. What is there right now, and what does the expansion mean?
Do I direct this to Ms. Dadersbeer?
I'm prepared to I can answer it if you'd like to, Your Worship.
Go ahead, please.
Through you. So to the question, there is a relationship between London Middlesex Community Housing and Rogers, and Rogers came to LMCH to offer an opportunity for tenants to be involved in this program. In as much as LMCH provides support, it is the tenants who directly connect with Rogers to access the service. And so they reach out to Rogers, they pay an amount that's reasonable, $10 a month, $9.99 a month. But it is a relationship directly between the tenants and Rogers. In order to expand that, we'd be working with LMCH to identify if there are additional tenants who, for whatever reason, have not chosen to be involved before. Maybe it is because $9.99 is not within their budget. So if we were to identify funding for that and then work with those tenants to see if they actually do have the capacity to be engaged in this program and have chosen not to, we're asking for funding to be considered for that purpose, and that maybe by extending to more people within LMCH's, I guess, portfolio of units, more people would have access to information that's happening in their community. Children would have access to some of the online learning that they're doing through school boards, and that people might also get access to additional information about how to stay safe during this period of time.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you through you to Ms. Dadersbeer for that response. I think that number 7 is completely appropriate. I think at this point in time, while we are always mindful of not straying into provincial jurisdiction, I think these are not normal times. I think we are going to be asking for significant assistance going forward as we get to the recovery now, and as we get to the recovery period from the province and from the Canadian government. I think the lines are a little bit blurred right now, and we are all working together to mitigate the effect of this crisis. So I feel the current program, the Rogers program, may have been accessed by people who had the capacity in their limited budgets. I think that today is a very different day, and we have, and I recognize that the school board is providing assistance to students for technology and things like that. But Wi-Fi, I believe, might be a different matter. And now we have every single student at home requiring Wi-Fi to access classrooms. My daughter has classes at least once a week over Zoom. I'm mindful that there are students that don't have appropriate or any Wi-Fi to be able to participate in that same way that every other child can. So I think this is very appropriate. I am glad that it's on this list, and I'm glad that the deputy mayor would like to see this move forward, because I support that as well.
Speaking of deputy mayor, he's right up now.
So I'm not sure if there's anyone else who wanted to speak. I just wanted to wait till everyone had a first go around. But a couple of things I wanted to mention. One is I do think it's important that we move relatively quickly, and I think we have to be comfortable with a fair amount of imprecision and uncertainty around what is in front of us and how exactly it's going to be implemented, because speed is of the essence. And so, yeah, under normal circumstances, I'd like to have a more fully fleshed out proposal for a lot of these things, like how exactly is that going to work, when is it going to happen, all these details. I just don't think we really have the luxury of waiting to get that. We're already 44 days into public health emergency by the time we actually make a decision on this report at council. And we've done some things early, waiving fees and penalties, which I think was helpful, making some changes around licenses for businesses, the big property tax deferral, which we already approved. But really, in terms of positive interventions, those are all like, don't send us your money interventions, which are very helpful for cash flow, and I think we're very important. But in terms of positive interventions to meet some of the needs we're seeing in the community, we haven't made a lot of changes yet. And I want to speak just directly to the issue around internet access and community housing units. So the Rogers program is a very good program. I think it's been pretty successful so far at the $10 a month program, and it's required no government intervention at all, which is wonderful. But there's lots of people who are not accessing it, and I think part of it is, as Councillor Lehman suggested, maybe there's a device issue there. I will tell you that just the one school board, the Thames Valley District School Board, has distributed 12,000 devices to students in the past month. So if they're $500 each, that's $6 million in devices to students who didn't have them and needed them. And that's iPads, Chromebooks, things like that. But they do need to have internet access to take advantage of that. And we have this situation where kids and families have just been thrown into having to learn from home. And for some families, they have resources to be able to do that and go online and learn things. And other families do not. And the digital divide that existed before has been really strongly reinforced. And I'm thinking in particular of kids who live in my ward, like they live in Booley, or they live off of Huron Street in community housing townhouses. They go to Lord Elgin Public School. That's what they normally would do. And now they can't. And they also can't get internet access. Their parents can't get internet access. And so a lot of people would have, say, for example, may have a cell phone with a data plan, but they just can't get the throughput through one cell phone for multiple kids, have multiple devices trying to get on the internet. So I think this is a small thing we can do. Ultimately, the city is the landlord for London community housing tenants. I think it's something we could do, that the community housing could do as the landlord, to make life better for the people who are living in those housing units. So that's why I think it's come forward as a thing that's within community housing and not a broad program across the entire city. For anybody who was low income, for example. This is something that's tangible, that could be done, that could build on an existing program at relatively low cost, the city cover the $10 a month. I think Councillor Lewis's point around equity is a good one. And, I think figuring out how to be fair to people who are already paying it out of their own pocket is something we should be thinking about. but I'd rather move quickly and get more people connected than worry too much about, how can we do something to make it square with people who already have internet access. I just think the priority needs to be trying to close that digital divide as quickly as we can. And I don't think everyone will have take up. So I think the 45,000, that is assuming that there's a lot of take up. I don't think everyone will, because they may not have the devices, they might not need access, they just don't want it, they're not in that situation. They're happy to go through their phone. So I think this is a pretty high number. We'll probably be somewhere lower than that. So I hope Councillor Lehman can support it. I do think it's an important thing we can do in the community.
Thank you. I know we have a couple of speakers on the list, but the way that we're going to handle this, we have a motion that's been moved and seconded to accept the report, including recommendations with the exception of 3 and 6. And what I'm going to be doing is taking number 7 to be voted on separately. So with that, I don't know if that will limit or expand the dialogue around this, but I think we're getting close to a voting point. I've got Councillors Lewis and Pelosa. Councillor Lewis. We need your audio, Councillor Lewis.
The shortcut key didn't work. Sorry, had to actually click on the button. First of all, I want to say I appreciate the points that Deputy Mayor Kelmer made around moving quickly rather than perfectly. I think there's quite a bit of validity to that. And there may not be, with regard to item 7, as much of an uptake as potentially has been budgeted for. I think it's incumbent on us to recognize that there is a level of provincial responsibility here, and that's why the province has made some child benefit payments available for technology assistance for those families. I did, through you to our staff, though, Your Worship, want to ask if through this process discussions have been had yet, or if discussions will be had to coordinate with the Thames Valley District School Board and the London District Catholic School Board to, frankly, make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes and duplicating some services here. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that there are school boards across this province. The Ottawa Carleton School Board is a great example. They stepped up and they bought a number of Wi-Fi hotspots. They bought extra tablets and other technologies for their students and distributed them that way. So to Councillor Lehman's point, I think there is a role for the school board to play here, and I'd like to know what level of discussion has occurred with the school board, because this is not a recommendation that's coming from our staff, actually. This is coming from the Social Impact and Recovery Task Force. So what level of discussion has been had with the school boards around item 7?
Ms. Livingston, do you want to direct that or deal with that?
I'm going to ask Ms. Dadersbeer to comment, please.
Through the chair, at this point in time, the school boards do sit on the task force. While we have not engaged them in specific discussions about this item, they are aware that this has come forward to them. I should also provide some clarity that the recommendation coming forward was not just for London Middlesex Community Housing. We have a number of other social housing units in our community, which we administer, and I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier, and I don't know how to raise my hand. So the reality is that if there are families or individuals who live within our social housing projects, there are 62 of them that we support, that might be an option for them as well. So we're thinking of expanding it beyond LMCH. In all cases, it is up to the individual to decide whether or not they have an interest in this. And obviously we would need to talk to Rogers as well, should you decide to approve this, to ensure that they have the capacity to do this as well.
Anything further, Councillor Lewis?
Yeah, just briefly, I appreciate that, and I don't need to wordsmith on the floor or do anything like that. I just would like staff to take into consideration as they move forward with this, that there's some coordination done with the Thames Valley and London District Catholic School Boards. I think clearly for all of us, our biggest priority in what I've heard from the debate today is that we make sure that our students are connected in particular. And I know that online learning is not just about connectivity. There's a whole bunch of other challenges that go along with people's learning styles as well. And because there's a 30-day time period for this, so I can support this in the short term because we're not filling the gap forever. But I would caution that moving forward, we're going to need a more comprehensive plan and something that's better thought out. And I don't think I'm going to move it as a friendly amendment right now, or whether it would be considered friendly or not. But I think that to come back to my earlier point, there's two items in Appendix E that really tie closely into what we're proposing right now that I'd like to discuss. But I'll leave that till after we've dealt with this matter, and then we can move on to that.
Thank you. I have Councillor Pelosi, Councillor Van Holst, Councillor Lehman, and then I think we are going to be closer to a vote than we've ever been. Councillor Pelosi, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And to my colleague, Councillor Lewis, for making some of the points, I would have that the province of Ontario has announced the support for families and $200 to apply online to assist with the cost of educational resources during school and childcare closures. And if families haven't applied for it, please do and allocate the money as you see fit. Concerned that, yes, this has been raised on the task force phone calls, but a lot of things have been raised on those phone calls that aren't our jurisdiction. Certainly, I support connecting families that need it with the internet, and this Rogers seems like a very gracious offering of $9.99, and if they would be willing to offer it to other social housing providers, absolutely. But in the staff, or this report before us, it's for an additional 3 months, which would bring us into the summer. Are we thinking about like a rolling 3 months until school ends? Like what's our time period of allotment that we're hoping to run this program for, especially as a parent during the summer? That's some of the worst times if I need to have children locked inside and no access to technology.
Ms. Dater-Spear, perhaps?
Certainly. Through the chair, I think at this point in time, what we were looking to do was to provide a 3-month support. So if families were to engage in this, if they hadn't already, they would be provided compensation for 3 months, and then thereafter they would hopefully be able to continue it. And if they weren't, then that obviously would be a challenge, but the intention was to give them at least a stipend for a period of time to support them in this most difficult time.
Councillor Pelosi?
Thank you for that answer. And just wondering, it seems like there might be an application process, or either we pay Rogers directly or we have to reimburse them. Just worrying about the staff time available, recognizing that our staff is very busy with many initiatives right now in relation to COVID and what we're doing, that we have staff adequate to address this properly and promptly with residents.
Ms. Dater-Spear.
Through the chair, this is a program where the individuals would reach out directly to Rogers. There would be a limited staff time, and that we would have to connect with all the stakeholders we have discussed earlier, but the intention is for individuals to reach out directly to Rogers, neither the housing corporation or any housing corporation or the cities involved in that negotiation of those relationships, save and above establishing the program in a broader way.
Councillor?
So the $45,000 allotment really isn't needed because we're not going to support the families who need the $45 or the $30 to cover 3 months payment.
Ms. Dater-Spear?
Sorry, through the chair, I'm not sure I exactly understand what you're asking, Councillor.
Try that again, Councillor, please.
Yeah, there's the potential financial impact of $45,000 that's before us in item number 7. Hearing from you that you would just, residents are left on their own if we can expand the program to play Rogers directly, that there's actually zero cost to the city for this. If residents actually need help, like, are we actually willing to pay the bill if families of low income need help accessing the technology?
Ms. Dater-Spear, I think we're talking about the billing process, just to be clear.
Thank you, and through the chair, and I'm sorry for not understanding the question earlier. At this point in time, tenants are required to pay the cost towards Rogers. I think the intention with this submission was to be able to provide a one-time stipend to help those people because their costs are significant. Maybe they may be impacted by job loss, or they need additional support at this period of time. It is to provide one-time funding to help them out. Should this support people to be involved in the program, others to be involved in the program who wouldn't be, they would get 3 months of compensation towards the program, but then after that they would generally be on their own. The intention would not be for us to engage in convincing people to be involved in the program. We would obviously support them to do this, and we would want them to see this as an opportunity, including those who have had the chance before and not been involved in it. But it is their choice, and it is their direct connection with Rogers that has been the way the program exists.
Councillor?
No, thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Van Holst, I don't see, is your thumb down?
Your Worship, I think I'd be most comfortable if we might just refer this till the council meeting and have our staff reach out to the school board. $45,000 isn't a great deal, and I think they're probably saving that amount of money just by not turning the lights off in schools, for instance. So they might be willing to take up that slack. Maybe they should have been approached first. So rather than have a debate about that, I would prefer that we reach out to them. So I guess I would make the motion that we just refer that portion of the plan to our council meeting, and maybe we can make the decision then.
I think there's actually been a fair amount of debate on the discussion to this point, but you will require a seconder. Is there a seconder for the referral? Councillor Lehman? I see you've lit up there. Are you seconding? I'm not sure what you're doing.
No, that was by accident. I ran out of power, so I'm just reconnecting. Apologize.
I just like to stretch from time to time, and I get that. Is there a seconder? There is no seconder. I have one more person on the list. I apologize, Councillor Van Holst. Is there something else you'd like to add then?
No, that's fine. It just seemed to me that might be a good path forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I'll remind colleagues that our intention is we've got a duly moved and seconded motion to exclude 3 and 6, and it was my decision that we would, based on the comments, we'd vote on 7 separately. So with that, Councillor Lehman, at one point you still have a thumbs up. So are you stretching or are you ready to go?
No, I'm ready to go. I just want to, weigh in here a bit. Like it's not the money, and I get what a lot of councillors are saying, and actually through the discussion, I've gone back and forth. I think Deputy Mayor made a good remark about us being landlords. I get the short-term remarks of Councillor Cassidy. I was a little concerned about the fact that, coming through the task force, and this is not the only area where we would look at doing this. That kind of supported my original concerns about being a slippery slope into other areas, and where does it stop? There's a lot of people right now that are paying for this. Are they going to say, well, why are we paying for this when other folks are getting it for free? Those are my concerns. However, I understand we got to get moving on here. So what I'm going to do is, unless somebody else wants to vote on this separately, I'm fine with just voting on the original motion and get on with it. However, if this comes back to us again for expanding this, or slippery slope into something perpetual, I will have serious concerns with that.
Thank you. Not looking to open this up for debate. It's a simple question. Does anyone then, based on that comment, wish to have this voted on separately? If so, could you please indicate? Otherwise, we would be dealing with the duly moved motion to accept this staff report with the implementation of recommendations, with the exception of 3 and 6. I see none. So I will call the question in just a moment. Before I do, though, I think it's appropriate, particularly because we have folks streaming in as well, that we see the amended motion, and that'll. I think the clerk is ready to put that in front of us, and any clarification around that would be helpful. Clerk, I'll turn that to you. Sorry, it looks like I've got before we do that, did you want to see the amended motion? Or it looks like, Councillor Lehman, I think your thumbs up again, but I think you've spoken, unless you want to speak again. But I have Councillor Morgan and Councillor Lewis thumbs up, so if that's correct, then Councillor Morgan, as we get close to the vote.
Yes, Your Worship. My understanding is that this is all the recommendations of the report together. So I did mention that I wanted to give a brief update on the component of government lobbying on this. So
Please go ahead.
I'll do that now.
That's helpful.
First, I want to let my colleagues know that I didn't bring a last-minute motion to amend this portion, but my intention is to circulate the FCM's most recent report and potentially bring an amendment to the motion to support FCM's direction for the council meeting. And I want to tell you what the FCM has done. And the reason why I want to bring it to council is because I have a committee of the whole meeting with the entire board on Thursday. I'm part of the Elections Readiness Working Group, the vice chair of that committee, and we're talking about our mobilization on this. And one of the items that we're discussing is whether or not we want resolutions from councils supporting the FCM position. So I'd like to have the time to have that discussion on Thursday before I adjust anything in this particular item. And I'll circulate the FCM's report. Essentially, though, to cut to the chase, the FCM has identified a $10 to $15 billion gap that municipalities will face because of COVID impacts for the first 6 months since the start of restrictions. And they're making an ask of the federal government. The way that that's broken down is 7.6 billion is suggested to be allocated through the existing gas tax funding formula, of which all municipalities would benefit. And the remaining 2.4 billion would be on transit ridership across existing formulas as well. So that would be significant for London, both because we have a large transit system and because we would benefit from our population of the regular gas tax formula. So it's a significant ask of the federal government. I can tell you, I watched the presentation our president made to the Finance Committee and the questions that were asked by members of Parliament. The main concern that came up was what role is the province going to play in all of this? And there's certainly going to be lots of need for everybody to take part. So there will be discussions between the FCM and government on this, but in the meantime, we'll be looking to have our members and member municipalities support the FCM ask in some way, and I will update you later. And in the meantime, I will circulate a link through the clerk to the report that has been written by the FCM on the issue, what the scope of it is. I mean, we know London's situation, that's what our report is about, but the consolidated issue across the country, what FCM's ask is the rationale for it and the way that it breaks down. So I just wanted to flag that for colleagues so that they're aware, and I'll make sure that you get all of that information, and I'll update you at council on my committee of the whole meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Lewis, do you have a final comment?
I do, Your Worship, and it's now that I've seen the wording of the motion before us, we're going to dispense with all of 2.1 at once. So I was going to deal with this separately, but I think I have to deal with it now procedurally, and that would be to add a clause that would also authorize staff to proceed with items 2 and 3 from Appendix E, preliminary recovery measures that are suggested. And as I've alluded to during our discussion around this, these tie directly into the short-term measures we're taking now. So item 2 is the enhancing the food security, and staff have identified, for example, that the Tree Me Fund could be used to help Londoners plant fruit-bearing trees and investigate partnerships with local greenhouses, key stakeholders, residents to grow, harvest their own fresh fruits and vegetables, which provides us some medium-term food security. And then closing the digital divide. I want to be very respectful and cautious in my comments here, because I don't want to open up a discussion around something at one of our boards or commissions. But I think it's incumbent on us to start developing a plan to dispose of technology assets in a way that gets them back into the community if they can be repurposed that way. So I think that both of these items, we need to give staff a green light to go ahead and start working on. And I'll see if I've got a seconder for that. But I think that those are those are two time-sensitive ones. We're always replacing equipment in the city. So if there's a way for the old equipment to go out to benefit the community, I think that that's never a bad thing to do. And when it comes to the gardening aspect of things, frankly, if we wait until June, you've missed your planting season. And for those who might want to take advantage of a program like that, it will be too late for them to do so come June. So I'd like to hopefully have a seconder to support letting staff move forward on 2 and 3 from Appendix E.
Before I look for a seconder, I'd like to just, if I might, refer this to Ms. Barbone for some thoughts. Some of this is post-pandemic, and I just wonder from a timing standpoint, that certainly sounds like the urgency that the councillor is talking in terms of. Do you have any thoughts, Ms. Barbone, that would help us on this?
Through the chair, I'm going to refer this to Ms. Livingston to answer.
Ms. Livingston, go ahead, please.
Thank you, and through the chair, I would just like to note for council's consideration that we provided the list of recovery measures only for information at this time. They were a preliminary list, and we have indicated that we would be prepared to bring back a more detailed recovery plan. I am concerned about picking individual items. There are also staff implementation issues that we have not fully thought through around some of those elements, and I am concerned about that while we are still in the middle of handling many pandemic issues across the corporation. So I would respectfully ask that anything from that appendix be considered, as we've indicated in the report, when we bring back a fuller recovery plan.
Thank you. I'm going to give it back to Councillor Lewis briefly for just a moment. Based on that comment, do you have any other comments you'd like to make?
Well, understanding what Ms. Livingston is saying, I would be prepared to wait on item 3. I think that that's fair, and I think creating a policy around the how we dispose of assets in a meaningful way is something we can look at later. For me, the issue that is really a time-sensitive one is item 2, because as I've said, if you're not getting those products in the ground the end of May, by the time we get around to authorizing staff to move ahead and look at things, it's too late. The planting season will be gone. So I can withdraw 3, but I'd like 2 to stand for our consideration, assuming I have a seconder.
Councillor, is there a seconder for this? I do not see a seconder, Councillor Lewis.
Sorry.
Sorry? Who's there, please? Is this Councillor?
It's Councillor Slee.
I apologize. Councillor Slee, go ahead.
Could you just read back what the motion is that Councillor Lewis is hoping to move?
We are in the typing mode as we speak, so you have to bear with us. We're trying to interpret that. Again, one of the challenges with any of this, particularly, and I'm going to, just while that's being typed, make the comment, you'll note that the various relief measures that were there, be they possibles, and regardless of where they came from, were intended to be dealt with for consideration at another time. And clearly, based on the motion that's on the floor, save and accept Councillor Lewis's proposed amendment, is that staff were prepared to look at these at another time while we're dealing with a number of issues, and I have some empathy for that, but I'm not here to make a political comment as much as this is a political forum. But certainly that was the request from that you heard from administration on this. But there is a motion on the floor, and we're looking to see the status of Councillor Lewis's. Oh, is there a? We need to hear it before we second it. So that was Councillor Slee's suggestion. Are you ready to go? So, Clerk, can you try to take us through this, please, and we'll all listen well.
As I understand through the chair, the amendment is to add a new Part H, which would read as follows: that the Civic Administration be directed to proceed with the implementation of an Initiative 2 of Appendix E, the post-pandemic preliminary possible recovery measures for Londoners and businesses, which is, quote, enhancing food security opportunities for Londoners.
That is the amendment. Is there a seconder?
Councillor Pelosi will second.
Thanks very much. Any other comments on this before we vote on this? Councillor Squire. Go ahead, Councillor Squire.
So now I'm starting to get really uncomfortable as we pick items off the list that we think are more crucial than other matters that aren't on the list. These matters were not recommended. They were not even put forward. I think Ms. Livingston has said really, really clearly, we have some really tough pandemic issues that we're dealing with right now. When I say pandemic issues, those are direct pandemic issues. And now what we're proposing to do is send off staff to try to implement something right now about food security when I'm listening to Ms. Livingston, we have a real priority here with just dealing with the pandemic as it is. So this one I'm not going to support. I hope we don't spend the rest of the night adding on things to the list that people like. If I had a chance to go through the list, I'm sure I would find some things I like, but I'm not going to do that.
I have Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yeah, I wanted to echo some of what Councillor Squire just said. I think a lot of what I think Councillor Lewis is hoping to accomplish, which is like sort of getting, indicating support for civic administration moving forward and continuing to talk about this idea, see what can be done. The actual recommendation, like the idea there is like talk with some partners about what could be done around food security. And I actually don't think like a motion is needed for that. I think actually staff can go and have those conversations already. And I think that actually is what they will do between now and when the report about the recovery plan will come forward. I think what is perhaps on the bubble in terms of what can happen or not is something like the TREME funding going to plant fruit trees, which, they have a certain season when they can be planted. You might miss a window. But I don't think actually that these programs are even operating right now, right? So we're down to minimal and essential services. We've cut back on all kinds of things that are available. If you go to the TREME website, it doesn't say how to apply for 2020. It's just not open, right, at all. And we've had to cut back on all kinds of city services already. And I think that's what Ms. Livingston is trying to very politely say, which is like, we're not delivering all these services now and we can't really expand them right now because we're busy with the emergency that is upon us. So I actually think the recovery plan, that these items that are identified for the recovery plan are well identified for that time frame. I do think between now and then, those kind of conversations do have to happen across a lot of the things that are listed in Appendix E. And I'm with Councillor Lewis on that. But I think that can happen without us making any motions today. So on the one hand, I don't know there's much harm in passing most of the motion, which is sort of like have those conversations. But I am concerned about opening the TREME piece in particular and the funding allocation, which if the program can't go ahead now, why do we need to deal with it now? And I think that's the obstacle for me. So I just raised that. I don't know if now is the time to really push hard on this particular one.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the councillor's motion. But I express the same thoughts Councillor Squire brought up about picking and choosing. I think I have a problem with that. I didn't come prepared to this committee to start picking and choosing certain things that I think are important. This is important, but I've heard loud and clear from staff that this is a post proposal. And with that, I think we do have to be a little bit cautious. When I look at the food security opportunities for Londoners, we know that the community gardens have been given the green light to go ahead, but we still need that process to be undertaken to understand when that date will happen. The partnerships, the opportunities for local greenhouses, I know that's already going on in the community. Those conversations are already existing. Residents can grow their own food right now and pass it on to the food bank or wherever. There's certain things here that can happen. And as much as I would like to support the motion, I don't think it is the right time to start picking and choosing what we're going to do in post-pandemic, especially with the TREME fund. I'm not sure where that is, and we may be setting ourselves up for something that we may not be really anticipating. So I will not be supporting it, even though I understand completely where the two councillors are coming from.
Colleagues, I'd like to call the question on Councillor Lewis's amendment. I had no one else to speak, so we will set that up. And as soon as we're ready, we will do a roll call. Here we are. Councillor Van Holst. Councillor Van Holst, will you audio in, please? This is on the amendment, just to be clear, on Councillor Lewis's amendment. Councillor Van Holst. We're just checking to see if he's on the line.
Okay, Your Worship, here I am. I'm sorry. I was out of the meeting with some technical difficulties.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst, yes or no on Councillor Lewis's amendment, please?
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Nay.
I'm sorry, yea or nay? It's hard to tell.
No.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Nay.
Councillor Cassidy.
No.
Councillor Squire.
No.
Councillor Morgan.
No.
Councillor Lehman.
No.
Councillor Hopkins.
No.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
No.
Councillor Turner. Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayavaga.
No.
Councillor Hillier.
No.
And I vote no. I think that's our first vote today.
Closing the vote, that motion is lost, 3-12.
So I'll take us now back to the motion duly seconded to approve the recommendation of the city manager with including the additional initiatives with the exception of items 3 and 6. So with that, I think that's been spoken through very well. I would like to call the question. Sorry? No. And no, and just to be clear, we are not doing 7 separately. We've dealt with that. That's going to be incorporated into this as well. So the only exclusions are items 3 and 6. Go ahead and clerk, just in case there's any question. It also helps those who are streaming in.
Thank you. Through the chair, the motion moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer and seconded by Councillor Hillier is that on the recommendation of the city manager and the managing director, corporate services and city treasurer, chief financial officer, the following actions be taken. Part A, the overview of projected financial impacts of COVID-19 on the corporation of the city of London be received for information. The summary of Part B, the summary of initiatives and programs implemented by the federal and provincial governments to support Ontarians through COVID-19 pandemic be received for information. Part C, the advocacy priorities with our federal and provincial partners outlined in the staff report dated April 28, 2020 be endorsed. Part D, the mayor be directed to submit the first report of the mayor's economic and social impact and recovery task forces to the federal and provincial governments. Part E, the following measures outlined in the staff report dated April 28, 2020 to provide further relief to individuals and businesses be approved for implementation. Subsection 1, London Good Food Box Program, Initiative 1. Part 2, Harvest Bucks Contribution Program, Initiative 2. Part 3, Housing Stability Bank Program, which is Initiative 4. Part 4, Deferral of Rent Payments for Tenants of City-Owned Properties, which is Initiative 5. Part 5, Closing the Digital Divide for Students and Families, which is Initiative 7, and Part 6, Subsection 6, coordinating the delivery of fresh, healthy food to people who are quarantining or self-isolating, which is Initiative 8. Part F, the Civic Administration be authorized to waive the requirement as outlined in the Reserve and Reserve Fund policy to charge interest on internal borrowings from reserves and reserve funds and temporary negative balances in reserves and reserves funds. And Part G, the Civic Administration be directed to finalize the approach to mitigate the projected balance shortfall through the 2020 mid-year operating budget monitoring report. And I think the city clerk has something to add. What about 9? Thank you. And in Part E, where we're approving implementation, it will include initiatives 9, 10, and 11, which I did not read out loud.
Just bear with us, colleagues. We're just adding that to the mix.
While Ms. Westlake Power's typing that up, I'll read out what those are. So number 9 is extension of payment terms for 60 days for City of London invoices issued to customers in the months of May, June, and July. Number 10 is extension of remittance of the remittance period for municipal accommodation tax revenues. And number 11 is flexibility in loading, unloading, and delivery times.
It is being typed for your viewing pleasure. Colleagues, we're about to do the roll call. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yay.
I'm sorry, yay or nay, it's hard to tell.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yay.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yay.
Councillor Morgan. I think that was a yay, sorry. Yes?
It was.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yay.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner. Sorry, Councillor Turner, we missed the audio.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yay.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, that motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you. I'm now happy to turn your attention to the second item of the consent agenda. 2.2, Governance Requirements and Recommendations, HDC London. We've been asked to deal with this separately. Ms. Dadersbeer, any comments on this before we move it out to our colleagues for comments?
Through the chair, there's a requirement to create a new board for the Housing Development Corporation. My recommendation is as presented. I'm making that recommendation both as the managing director and the board of HDC presently.
Thank you. I'll take any comments or questions colleagues may have. I have Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I was wondering, the recommendation here, I have no doubt of Mr. Cooper's abilities to do this. He has, in short order, managed to provide some rather substantial and important housing and shelter for those who are street involved to require isolation during COVID. A lot of his work right now is focused on COVID. Given that we just went through the process for London Middlesex Housing Corporation to appoint a board of 3 people, that board seemed a little more consistent with the objectives of the HDC. I don't see affordable housing and social housing as necessarily the same client group, or affordable housing is is a little more development focused, I guess. And so I'm wondering why we didn't choose people from development services or other groups to be able to help facilitate the oversight of HTC in the interim.
I'll probably take that to Ms. Datersbeer, but it might be Ms. Livingston. Ms. Datersbeer, is this you?
I'm happy to respond through the chair. Thank you for the question. I do think that it's important for us to look at where we are currently and our ability to identify individuals who could support us, the 4 individuals that we identified for LMCH. And the reason we identified 4 is because LMCH is a large organization with a number of activities that they're actively involved in. To speak to Mr. Cooper and his credentials, as you know, he's a registered planner. He worked at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing and was instrumental in supporting the roll-up of affordable housing initiatives at the province for many years. So he has a background, in addition to his work in homeless prevention here at the city, he has a significant background in the delivery of affordable housing programs and has that background. He's also worked very closely with Mr. Justicia and the members of that team. You saw that today in terms of the recommendation on the Indwell project. He is up to speed on the work that's being done by HTC, and he also obviously carries the ability to see how that compares to the other work that we're doing. In developing affordable housing, we have been able to, further to the Indwell project, create some units for those who are vulnerable in our community, including those who are homeless, and there's been a great working relationship. In addition to that, Mr. Cooper is also a member of the housing leadership team, which I chair currently, and which Mr. Dickens will chair moving forward, and they work quite closely together as both city colleagues and community colleagues as it relates to housing. I think he's well positioned to take this on, and he's interested and available to do so.
Councillor Chair.
How long will the, through you, Mr. Chair, this appointment last? At what point do we start to move towards some permanence? I've expressed my concerns about this process in the past. I continue to have the reservations. I think as we've identified some significant vulnerabilities, I think, in having the board represented by a singular person. And I continue to have those reservations in this, where with HTC, with the LMCH, we appointed 4, which provides some continuity of operations if one were to be lost or to transition to another role. In this circumstance, we have that same vulnerability again.
Thank you. I think there's an opinion request from Ms. Datersbeer on this. Sorry, Councillor Turner.
Sorry, the question was for how long does this go on, I guess.
Ms. Datersbeer.
I'm going to pass the answer to Ms. Livingston, if I could, through the chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. The intention would be to have it be until at the very latest the end of the year. The year is the review that needs to be completed, but our intention would be to move quickly with that work. And so in worst case scenario, it would be to the end of the year, ideally much sooner into early fall.
Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Squire.
Thank you. I supported the London Middlesex community housing. I'm like Councillor Turner, though I'm starting to become more concerned. As we've been just saying, you know, I understand the COVID issue. I think it's vitally important both these boards have representation outside of administration of the City of London, and I think both need some kind of a political component. I think they need council oversight and council involvement, and I also think they need community involvement. So this is not something that I hope comes back again and says, let's extend this. I think we're getting to the point now where really we're halfway through our council term, and in that time period, and I really think we've got to get a grip of getting representation on those boards.
Ms. Livingston.
Thank you, through your worship. With respect, we would not have been in front of you, but for the fact that Ms. Datersbeer, who is the board member for both LMCH and for HDC, is moving on to another opportunity. Hence, that's why we're in front of you at this time. Otherwise, we would have been and except for pressures around the pandemic, would have been rapidly proceeding with that work. So we are only here in front of you because it is a transition, because we are losing the board member for both those organizations. That's the reason we're in front of you right now, not because we're trying to prolong or create a set of obstacles to get to an end point. We're just trying to deal with the situation that is in front of us right now.
Councillor Squire?
I hope I wasn't suggesting any of the things that the city manager just said. I wasn't suggesting in any way that staff is impeding anything. I'm just saying it's something that I feel strongly, I think some other councillors do, that we have to get to a point where these boards have other representation. If it was taken that I was somehow saying that, I wasn't.
I'd like to ask, I don't have another speaker, but I'd like to speak, and I'd like to ask Deputy Helmer, Mayor Helmer, to take the chair for a sec.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much. I support the recommendation for Mr. Cooper being the director at this time. Look, I think what's clear, we've got a couple of very huge dynamics going on today, colleagues. This is not unlike some of the discussion we had as it related to the board discussion just last meeting. And it strikes me really clearly that we've got the two major circumstances is the departure of Ms. Dadersbeer and COVID-19. And our staff have been literally working to deal with these issues and the significant effort. I don't think this is in any sense any intent to bypass the political process. And by the way, Councillor Squire, I don't think anybody took your comments that way, just so you know. I think this is one of those things where, frankly, we need to work through this, and sometimes challenging times require a decision like this. So I'm absolutely prepared to support the recommendation of staff. So that's my comment. Before we put this to, I guess I'll need a mover and seconder. I don't have anybody else on the speakers list. Is there a mover? Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Pelosi. Any other comments? Then let's call the question when the clerk is ready, please. Here we go. Councillor Van Holst.
Yay.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yay.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Pelosi.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 15-0.
All right, there we go. So I have no scheduled items. Thank you, colleagues. I have no scheduled items, but under 4 of the agenda items for direction 4.1, request for a shareholders meeting, HDC, I will need a mover. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Comments or questions? Anna? Sorry, Councillor Hopkins, I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. I'm going back and forth between raising my hand and unmuting myself. I do have a quick question about how we do delegations. I understand that there is a delegation request for the stakeholders meeting, and just want to, now that we live in the era of Zoom, how that, is there a procedure that we have in place for delegations? Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff.
Thank you. I think someone with more wisdom than me might well be the clerk, so we'll ask her to respond, please.
I'm not sure where that person is that has more wisdom, but I'll be happy to answer the question. We are asking people who are requesting delegation to submit their comments in writing. However, with respect to the AGMs, we will work with the organization to have them join us, in a Zoom meeting and do similar to what Ms. Barbon did today with some slides and sharing the screen with those provisions.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, I appreciate those comments and look forward to the delegation.
Thank you. I see no other speakers on the list. We'll call the question. Councillor Van Holst?
Yes.
Councillor Lewis?
Yes.
Councillor Slee?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy?
Yes.
Councillor Squire?
Yes.
Councillor Morgan?
Yes.
Councillor Lehman?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yay.
Councillor Van Meerbergen?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa?
Yes.
Councillor Kyabaga?
Yes.
Councillor Hillier?
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Colleagues, we have a request for a shareholders meeting from London Hydro. I would look for a mover. I have Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any comments or questions? Then we will call the vote. Councillor Van Holst?
Yes.
Councillor Lewis?
Yes.
Councillor Slee?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Elmer?
Yay.
Councillor Cassidy?
Yes.
Councillor Squire?
Yes.
Councillor Morgan?
Yes.
Councillor Lehman?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yay.
Councillor Van Meerbergen?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa?
Yes.
Councillor Kyabaga?
Yes.
Councillor Hillier?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Colleagues, I have a request for a shareholders meeting of London Middlesex Community Housing. I'd like to find a mover for that, please. Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Comments or questions? Seeing none, shortly we'll call the question. Councillor Van Holst?
Yes.
Councillor Lewis?
Yes.
Councillor Slee?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Yay.
Councillor Cassidy?
Yes.
Councillor Squire?
Yes.
Councillor Morgan?
Yes.
Councillor Lehman?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yay.
Councillor Van Meerbergen?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa?
Yes.
Councillor Kyabaga?
Yes.
Councillor Hillier?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Colleagues, we have from the London Public Library a notification of a board vacancy due to the resignation of board trustee Donna Vachon. So we are looking for a motion to accept. Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Any comments or questions? We will talk about next steps on this as well in just a moment. Councillor Pelosa, did you want to ask first?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment as a member, as is Councillor Lewis of the London Public Library Board and also serving on the Museum London Board. Ms. Vachon had dedicated 8 years going between both boards and being a huge service. So just thank you for her dedication to arts and culture in the City of London.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and my thanks as well to Ms. Vachon for her service. I do have a question, however. So there's this vacancy. I want some clarification, and I don't know. Hopefully the members of council who serve on the library board can help. But I thought that there was another vacancy. There was a member that resigned quite publicly back in February, and I'm wondering why if that vacancy has been filled, and if not, why not?
Councillor Pelosa, can you enlighten us?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to Councillor Cassidy for that question. The board member in question did bring his resignation to the board as he's a man of his word and said he would. At that time, the board discussed it. and informed that member that he's of a great value to the board and we value his service and would prefer that he reconsider, and at which point the board, he took back his resignation as the board was declining it.
Thank you. I have, I'm sorry, Councillor Cassidy, any other questions or comments?
No, that's it. So I just want to be clear. So that he did not resign in the end. There's only this one resignation and one vacancy, and it's being filled tonight. And I'm fine with that. Thank you.
That is correct. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, just briefly, because Councillor Pelosi spoke well. Ms. Vestron's service on the board goes all the way back to my time as chair, which was back in 2010 to 2013, and I served on this board with her. And she was an excellent board member for this. I'm sure she'll be involved in the future on other boards, and they'll be lucky to have her. She was always well researched. Always brought great dialogue and discussion to the board, and I quite enjoyed serving with her. I didn't want to let it pass by without adding my own comments, since I did have the opportunity to serve as well. Thanks very much. I saw Councillor Lewis. Yes, your hand's up. Councillor Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And through you, I just want to clarify. Yes, the board did not accept the previous resignation that was submitted. The board declined to receive that. But Councillor Pelosi has already addressed that, so thank you to her for doing that.
Doubly reinforced. Thank you so much. I have no other other speakers, so it's been duly moved and seconded. We will call the question. Here we are. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Slee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Homer.
Yay.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yay.
Councillor Van Merbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosi.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes, so back to the clerk.
Closing the vote, that motion's passed 15-0.
So colleagues, what I've been advised is that we have some 41 applications on file from folks who were particularly interested in this particular appointment, and I'd like to get some thought as to the direction. What's your pleasure with respect to considering this vacancy? Do we want to address this at a future meeting? What's your pleasure? Councillor Lewis, I saw you nodding your head. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I think we did have some communication from the board chair as well in terms of some of the things that they would like us to consider when we're looking at appointment. But I think it would be advisable to have the clerk's office contact those who had previously applied to see if they're still willing to stand, and then we can deal with this at a future SPPC. I suspect that we probably also want to make sure that the vacancy is posted publicly so other individuals who may wish to apply can do so.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we don't want to tighten that up just a little bit, but I have Deputy Mayor Helmer to speak, and then Councillor Turner.
Councillor Lewis said what I wanted to say.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would agree with Councillor Lewis's suggestion. I'm a little perplexed by your comment, though. I respectfully inquire as to what you meant by tightening it up. I think it needs to be a public posting and needs to go through the normal appointment process.
Yeah, actually, just to be clear, I wasn't trying to shortlist from 41 to 1. Ultimately, we will get to 1. That's the goal. It was to put some direction to this and look for some direction as far as how council wanted us to proceed. It looks like the first step might well be to put an inquiry out to those individuals Or the option could well be, it's the pleasure of council. You could approach it with a broader interest, but we do have 41 individuals. So it's that tighter direction that I was looking for from council for that purpose. I think Councillor Lewis was quite articulate.
Your Worship, I would disagree with just looking to the 41. I think those people need to be reapproached, but we absolutely have to do a public posting, in my opinion, as well.
And so I hear that. So we're going to work on a motion to do that. We would need to have moved and seconded, but let us put some wording together on that and fully respect that as well. Just bear with us. Councillor Kayabagi, do you have some comments while we're doing that? Please go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to express that this should be open to the broader public, and if there needs to be a seconder or a mover, I'm happy to do so.
We'll look at the wording. If you're happy with it, we'll be pleased to have you move it then. I'm asking the clerk to read the motion.
Thank you. Through the chair, that the city clerk be directed to review the current applications on file to confirm that those individuals remain interested in appointment, and further that additional applications be sought in order to fill the vacancy on the London Public Library Board.
Councillor Kayabag, are you comfortable with moving that?
Yes.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Lewis, thank you. Any comments or questions? I've got no one else there, so let's get on with it then. Don't laugh at me, Phil. We'll call the question in just a moment. Here we are. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Slee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yay.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
I was laughing at Councillor Turner. Yay.
Perfect. Councillor Morgan.
Yeah.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yay.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Sorry, I switched to dark mode. Yay.
Councillor Veloza.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabagi.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, that motion's carried 15-0.
Thanks very much, colleagues. We have, and thank you, the clerks in advance for that. Under 4.5, the Hamilton Road BIA, we have one board member resignation and a board member update with a resignation and a proposed appointment. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I just wanted to say thanks to the resigning board members. Cassie Mass-Wildman, we're sad to see her go because she did a tremendous amount of work and showed great leadership. And Raphael Metron, he's stepping down because he's taking the helm of the Hamilton Road Business Association, which owns the tree trunk tours. So he's still working hard for the area. And we're delighted to welcome, if you would approve, colleagues, Chantal Wache, who is one of our new business owners. So she opened the space to grow, and it's a great place, and she's doing some wonderful work there, and also making it look much nicer too. So thrilled to have her on board as well. So I would be happy to move both A and B, and thank you for your support.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Lewis, thank you very much. Comments, questions? Councillor Kayabagi, I see your hand up.
I didn't realize my hand was still up, but since you called my name, I just had a question on if there's a board appointment suggestion, if we are opening, boards up to the larger public, shouldn't we open this one as well?
Specifically on that appointment, I think that Councillor Van Holst has responded, but I think it has been the practice that those come through the BIAs themselves. And in fact, I believe that's the bylaws that they have, that they work from.
Okay, that's good.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Seeing none? Then we'll call the vote. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis. Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yay.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yeah.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yay.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner. Councillor Pelosa. Councillor Kayabага.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. I have no other deferred matters nor additional business, but we do have a confidential agenda, and it would be my intention to, unless otherwise required, to move into confidential agenda and then move out into public following that briefly. And so I will look for, I'll look to move into closed session. Is there a mover? Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Thank you very much. I think we'll do that with a hand vote. All those in favor? That looks unanimous. Thank you very much. We will give a minute for setup and moving of parties about, and then go from there. Thank you.